Good evening, everybody. I'm Carolyn Laurier. I'm the Community Care Coordinator. I'm thrilled that all of you are here tonight. I know there's lots of other things competing for our attention today. So before I talk about the book that we're going to be hearing from tonight, I do want to introduce our two presenters. I think everyone knows Erica Myers, who is the director of Whittier. She's going to be reading passages from Mary's book. And then we have Dr. Robert Santulli, who has driven up here from Massachusetts specifically for this, so thank you very much for doing that for us. I think many of you know Dr. Santulli. He was a psychiatric and dementia consultant here at Kendall from 1996 to 2013, and he is an honorary associate professor of psychiatry at the School of Medicine at Dartmouth. And equally important for tonight is that he knew Mary and Cal personally. So Erica is going to read the passages. Dr. Santulli is going to make some comments to just give us some context and to understand how Mary and Cal's story obviously was specific to them, but also has lots of sort of universal elements for people who are facing Alzheimer's. After the reading, there's going to be time for questions and answers. So this is the book we're going to be reading from. I want everyone to be aware that it's in the Kendall Library. I also have a copy in my office that I'm happy to loan out. So it's called The Memory of All That. Obviously, you can order it online or at a local bookstore, which I highly recommend. So I would like to introduce Cal and Mary. Their photos are right here. Some of you in the audience may have known them. They were Kendall residents. So Mary was an expert in working with children who were autistic and who had learning disabilities. She published many books on this topic, some of which went on to be international bestsellers, and Cal was a very well-known inventor, and that's his picture on the cover of that magazine right there. So I didn't know them, but I understand that they had an exceptionally supportive and loving relationship, and that they really encouraged each other to be successful in their work. And it's with that same spirit of love and support that the two of them faced Alzheimer's together. And I think the readings tonight are really going to illustrate that. So I'm going to turn it over to Erica.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to ask you to put a hand up or stop me if I'm not talking loud enough or I'm talking too fast, okay? I want to thank you for coming. I did have the opportunity to read the book myself, and it's actually a really beautiful love story. And I've been working with residents with Alzheimer's and other cognitive impairments for close to 18 years now. So this is a subject very near and dear to my heart, and I'm very happy to be here and be able to participate. So these first few passages that I will read illustrate how Mary and Cal dealt with the early signs of Alzheimer's, the initial diagnosis, and coping with the challenges of the early stages of the disease and telling their family. I had just turned 43 when I married Cal MacCraken, a second marriage for us both, and began the most wonderful stretch of my life. For the first 25 years we were together, the world just shone. So many good things happened. We walked in a haze of happiness. Then, slowly at first, our life together began to change. In the beginning, it was just little things. Cal had increasing trouble finding his keys and glasses, but we all do, or so I thought. He had a few odd moments. One evening, I found him standing in the garage outside the door into the kitchen, his keys in his hand. "I can't figure out which one unlocks it," he said. Looking back, I could see there had been other hints I hadn't noticed, or maybe deliberately ignored. Others were noticing, though, and they urged me to get Cal to a neurologist. Cal resisted fiercely, saying he didn't need to see a doctor. But inside, he must have known something was wrong, and he finally found the words to talk about it. We were up in our little house in the country. This was where I wrote and Cal sketched and sorted out his ideas for new inventions. I was sitting on the sofa, reading. Cal was lying stretched out with his head in my lap, half dozing. Then he began to talk. So quietly at first I could hardly hear him. "I'm scared," he said. "I don't think I've ever been scared in my life, but I am now. Something's wrong. I forget all kinds of things, sometimes even where I am. I don't know what's happening to me." Cal sat up and I turned to hold him close and clasped his hand in mine. "We're getting older, Cal," I said gently. "We'll be okay. We have each other, and together we can handle anything. I'll go with you to see the doctor." The doctor's diagnosis, though gently put, confirmed what we had feared. Cal truly had Alzheimer's. Having faced it ourselves, it now seemed time to tell the children. His daughter Joan, a doctor, said this would make Cal realize he had nothing to be ashamed of and that his family was supportive. Cal bravely agreed to this plan. We invited everyone for both Thanksgiving and Cal's birthday, his 75th, which was the next day. We had a lovely Thanksgiving dinner, and the next evening we gathered again, eating turkey sandwiches and watching Cal open his presents. Then he stood up, took a big breath, and said, "I have something to tell you all. I have a touch of Alzheimer's." His children were supportive, talking over each other. "We love you just the same," said one. "It's okay," another called out. "I think my memory's going too, Dad." Joan gave him a birthday card in which she'd written memories of a few things they'd done together when she was younger. Cal's face lit up. He could remember each of the events and add details his daughter had forgotten. Overall, it seemed to make things easier for him to tell his family what was happening. So learning more about the disease led Mary to make some big changes, and the biggest of all, maybe, was the move to Kendall. Despite Cal's strong refusal at first. Entering Kendall, I felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. The thought of how much I was leaving behind brought sadness. But at Kendall, we were no longer in a world of just the two of us, as we had gradually become in Englewood. There I'd begun to feel more and more isolated. Here, many hands were reaching out to us. We were invited to be part of a newcomers group. A young social worker at Kendall had come up with the idea. Cal just loved this group. He didn't say much, but he was delighted in the talk and the laughter and the friendliness. I was surprised and pleased when Cal introduced himself with what was becoming his stock line. "I'm Cal MacCraken, and I have a little bit of Alzheimer's." One couple, Betsy and Sandy Sanderson, became our good friends and invited us to join a tennis group. Cal was the strongest player there. He reveled in doing something he was still good at, grinning as he put a tricky spin on a return or lobbed it over someone's head. Cal also enjoyed how friendly everyone was at Kendall. Each person he passed in the halls or on the stairs going down to the dining room would smile and give him a big hello. After yet another resident stopped to invite us for a drink, Cal turned to me. "I've had some pretty good ideas in my life," he said, "but Kendall was the best."
I'll just make a couple of comments here. I think, first of all, I don't know how many of you, if any of you, knew Cal and Mary. Cal died in '99 and Mary some years after that. It was a great pleasure and honor to know them. Cal was a brilliant man, a wonderful and warm person. If you have been over at the hospital, the HMC in the hot weather, and you notice how cool it is, you can thank Calvin for that. He invented the system they used for cooling, where it would freeze ice in the middle of the night and blow air over it during the day to make it cool. That was one of Cal's many, many inventions. I think that these selections point up a few things that are very important. First of all, the insidiousness with which this illness came on. Well, we all forget these things. From some of the early symptoms. Is it just getting older? Is it just what anyone might have happen? Or is it a sign of trouble? And even today, and this is when these events were happening, this is more than 25 years ago, even today, we really aren't any better at figuring that out. We know that when older people are having troubles with their memory, it's common. And where you draw the line between how many of these things where you can't remember a name, can't figure out which key to use, forgetting things that just happened, how many of these are part of normal life as one ages, and when do you start being concerned that it's a sign of an illness? We still don't know how to figure that out. But sooner or later, because Alzheimer's and most other dementias really are relentlessly progressive, it will show itself, it will appear. And those things that get written off initially can no longer be written off, and as in their case, finally it came to the point where Cal and Mary were able to talk about it, which many couples aren't able to do at that early stage, and it's a tribute to them that they could, and to finally to go get a diagnosis and to have a label. And one would think it's extremely distressing, and of course it is, extremely distressing to be told you have Alzheimer's disease. But it's more complicated than simply a sad feeling because of bad news, because in most cases, people know that something is going wrong, and having a label to explain what the problem is, having some words to help you understand, this is not just my imagination or my spouse's laziness or whatever. This is something, an illness, that can be, in an odd way, relieving and helpful to people, as I think it was for them. So can a couple of other things here that I think are pointed out in these early readings. One is the decision Cal and Mary made, Cal primarily made, to tell the family. That's never an easy thing. And it's never easy for kids to hear that. But it was relieving for them and important for Cal and Mary, and ultimately was valuable in terms of his care, so that everybody was on the same page. And I think too many people try to hide this from their adult children. Children know something's going on. It only makes them worry more when they aren't told what's going on. But it really, as sad as it is, it's terribly important to share that. And as Cal did in his inimicable way, I have a touch of Alzheimer's, like I have a touch of pregnancy. That was his way of coping with it and letting people know and being able to be open and forthright about it from early on. And this was a man who took great pride in his cognitive abilities, in his ability to control his environment, but his ability, his recognition of the need to do that is terribly important and terribly valuable for him and for Mary, I think. And the other thing that this points out, and obviously we've skipped over a lot of territory in coming to this reading, because much of the early parts of this illness, during much of the early parts of this, they were still living down in Englewood, New Jersey, and making the decision to come to Canada. They had no ties here. Cal didn't go to Dartmouth, he went to Princeton. But someone had given them the good suggestion to look at this place, and they did. And at that time, Kendall had just been built, or was being, I guess had just been built, so there were openings, so you could apply and actually get in a reasonable amount of time. No longer is that the case. I'm still on the waiting list, by the way. That was one of the great decisions that they made, was to come when they were still able to live independently in an apartment together and to have a life, to play tennis, to do things, to get to know people, albeit with, I have a touch of Alzheimer's. That was a very important thing. And to receive the support and care from not only the very wonderful staff here, but from all of the residents and their friends and neighbors here at Kendall was a tremendously important part of this. Alzheimer's, it takes, as Hillary Clinton said, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to take care of someone with Alzheimer's, for sure. It's certainly not a job for one caregiver, although there's usually one primary caregiver, as Mary was. But it takes a lot of people around. And this is the village for people like that, and it was a very positive village for Cal and Mary in that regard. So, but it was not easy for them to acknowledge this. They lived in a wonderful house in Englewood. I happen to know where they lived because I used to live in that same area, actually. And it was a very hard decision to give all of that up and come to one of these very much smaller apartments. But it was the right thing to do. And whether it was memory or character, Cal, although it wasn't his idea, and he initially fought it, he came around to saying, this was a great idea I had, wasn't it? And Mary was smart enough to simply say yes, rather than say, well, wait a minute, it was my idea. That wouldn't have done any good at all.
Thank you. In this next passage, Mary leans on friends and the community resources for support. Friends proved a blessing in other ways, for me as well as Cal. Small things involving his care could seem overwhelming to me. Cal had to have a tooth pulled. I began to worry about all that could go wrong and asked Betsy if she'd go with us to the oral surgeon. Of course, she said. She and Sandy would both come. At the dentist's office, Cal went off readily when the nurse called his name and soon returned, coming over to take my hand. Your husband was a model patient, the nurse said, smiling at me. It was nothing, I apologized quietly to Betsy. We're happy to help you any time, she whispered back. Was Kendall perfect? No. What place is? But I had found my community of brave and considerate friends. As well as good doctors, at Kendall and Dartmouth-Hitchcock, I also learned of an Alzheimer's support group nearby and made myself go. I found it hard to listen to the problems that others were having with their spouses, all of whom had declined further than Cal. I still couldn't believe this would happen to him. But the social worker leading it, Ruth Wybrow, was both sympathetic and helpful. As I was learning again and again, Alzheimer's was too hard a disease to cope with alone.
I just want to interject for one second. The tremendous importance of that decision to go to the support group. Ruth Wybrow, no longer living, ran a group for many years and worked with older individuals in a private practice in Lebanon. And now I think that one of the most valuable but underutilized treatments or services, I'm not sure what the right word is, for family members of someone with dementia, with Alzheimer's, is support group. Carolyn runs one here. There are other groups around at the Aging Resource Center and elsewhere. Support groups offer something that nothing else can. For years, when I was still in practice, I ran the support group at the Aging Resource Center, originally at the hospital, and then at the Aging Resource Center. And even though I was seeing people with Alzheimer's and seeing their families every day, day in and day out, whenever I would do the support group, I would look forward to it, and I would always learn something new each time I went. There's something about the experience of being with a group of people who are in the same boat that is invaluable, and that no professional or anyone else can really provide. along with the sense of you're not in this alone, you've got other people who are dealing with exactly the same thing. Maybe they're a little further behind not as far along as you, maybe they're a little further along. But everybody's in the same boat. No matter how good a friend you have or how good a doctor you have, none of those people can provide what the members of a support group can provide, those people who are dealing with this themselves, just as you are. And there's, in addition to talking one-on-one with people who are caregivers, there is something about the dynamic of the group that brings out issues that are very, very helpful and simply don't come out otherwise. So I think medical care is very expensive. Alzheimer's care is very expensive. Support groups are free. It's one of the most underutilized but most powerful tools there is in providing care. Because there are support groups for people with dementia. That's a very different group. I'm talking about support groups for family members, for spouses primarily, family members, caregivers of people with dementia. How someone with dementia does, as I think you'll see from this book, from the rest of the readings and from the book, how someone with dementia does depends on many things, but on nothing more than how well the caregiver is doing. So anything that can enhance the caregiver's strength and ability and knowledge to deal with what he or she has to deal with is one of the most powerful tools, more powerful than any medicines we had then or have now. I just really want to emphasize that I wish everyone who is dealing with this would go to support groups. In a way, it's good they don't. We wouldn't have enough support groups. But there is such an important value that I want people to really take very seriously.
Inevitably, the illness gradually worsened. There were new and more troubling symptoms, and different accommodations needed to be found. Evenings were hard. We no longer ate in the dining room. Cal found it difficult to wait for the waiter to bring our meals and would pound the table with his fists. We switched to the cafe, which was much less formal. But this too was a challenge as we had to take trays through a line and pick up our food. I tried to shuffle Cal in front of me while selecting a main course, salad, and something to drink for both of us. Again, friends helped out. A wonderful couple who lived on the floor above us suggested we eat dinner together each night. Cal was fond of both Edie and Charlie. Charlie somehow juggled Cal and 2 glasses of cranberry juice through the line and kept him happy, while Edie and I picked up the rest of our food. Then Cal would listen while we 3 talked, occasionally saying something. I took Cal with me everywhere now, afraid to leave him alone even for a little, to go to the grocery store, the hairdresser, the dentist. Once we went together to my eye doctor. I got Cal settled in a chair across from me, and things went fairly well for about 15 minutes. Then, Cal started taking off his shoes and socks. Wiggling his toes, he demanded the eye doctor examine his aching feet. "Mary," the doctor said, "I think that's enough for today. Call and we'll reschedule." I knelt before Cal, put his shoes and socks back on, and acknowledged to myself that I needed to get more help. Mary, ever resourceful, managed to find a good part-time companion for Cal. Still, she grew increasingly exhausted. Cal's daughters convinced her it was time for Cal to move to Whittier. Once Cal and Mary accepted the transfer to Whittier, there were some good months for them both, but the transition was very difficult, as it often is. Here, for the rest of the passages, Mary switches to a diary form, saying, "My life has shrunk to a sharp focus on the immediate present. I can't think beyond that." November. I wake to an empty bed. no one beside me. Why had I let the doctors, the nurses, the family talk me into letting Cal be moved to the Alzheimer's unit? My tears become sobs. My stomach aches with guilt. When I go down to Whittier, Cal is at a little table eating breakfast. He hasn't given us a bit of trouble, Doris, the head nurse in Whittier, says, smiling. Back in our apartment, I'm thinking how to live this new kind of life. I decide that there will be no hard and fast rules. The most important thing will be to spend time with Cal. By the end of the week, we are into a loose routine. I go down at 10 or 10:30 in the morning. Cal sits up and smiles when he sees me. I say, "Good morning, darling," and he raises his face for a kiss. "I love you," I say. "I love you too," he replies, and this is our morning ritual, the same each day. February. While Whittier still lacks some furnishings, kindness and thoughtfulness are plentiful. All the nurses and aides are gentle and dedicated. Cal has been there 3 months now, and I have yet to hear any of them say a cross or unkind word. This morning I went to see Ruth Wybrow, the social worker who leads my Alzheimer's group. I told her that for the first time in many months, Cal seems happier, and that this is such a relief. I even feel I can take little trips away, leaving him in safe hands.
Just to give a little historical context, you hear about his transfer here to Whittier, and you're probably thinking about that beautiful unit on the end of this building. That wasn't Whittier when this happened in the late 1990s. Whittier was carved out of, I don't know if it was a closet or what, but it was a very small space. And instead of a door, it had a shower curtain. And you kind of had to go in sideways. It was that narrow. So it was a clearly temporary solution to what was recognized as a need to have an environment that was specific for people with dementia. And why is that important? It's important not just because, well, families can't handle it, so they've got to put their person somewhere. That's not what it's about at all. What it's about is creating an environment, or having an environment where people are trained, people want to work with persons who have dementia. As you heard, after 3 months, not an unhappy, unkind word had been heard by Mary, and she was very observant and would have heard it if it was there, and I'm sure that's still the case. It's not the case in most of these facilities, I can tell you that. So the idea of a Whittier, of a good dementia unit, let's emphasize that, and this is one of the best. The idea of a dementia unit is not just where can this person go when I can't handle them anymore, but what are their special needs now, given their cognitive status, that have to be met by people who are trained in the ability to do this. And that's what a dementia unit is all about. And Mary found that, Cal found that. The idea of making that move, however, was terribly difficult for them. As it always does, it took a long time. Once after the suggestion had been made, and I made the suggestion originally, although perhaps along with the family and others, that Cal should go there. It took a long time after that for it to be accepted, which is par for the course. But once it finally was, the staff at Whittier are skilled enough to make that transition easier than it would otherwise be, although it often isn't easy, no matter how skillful the staff is. But the important thing that I want to just emphasize is two. One, Whittier was different then than Whittier is now. It's a lot better. But this is it's a form of treatment. It's not just I give up, so where can I put him? But what does he or she need? And let's find the best place for that. And the best place for that for them and for many others is a place very much like Whittier.
Thank you. Over the next 3 months, Cal declines further and can do less and less for himself. He and Mary still enjoy some good times, though his days are mixed. So back to the diary format. April. We drive to our favorite spot and park on River Road. I switch on the tape and we listen to Ella Fitzgerald songs. The songs we used to dance to. No more dancing now, but we hold hands. We stay for almost an hour. I leave the tape on during the drive back and Ella sings, I got rhythm, I got music, I got my men, who could ask for anything more? I sing along, crazy as it sounds. 2 old people, one terminally ill, are together and happy. Who could ask for anything more? May. But the stormy days grow more frequent. While it's very difficult for Cal to find the right words for what he wants to say, he does seem to have an ample supply of swear words, most of which I've never heard before. The nurse I talked to about this understands. She says it's the only way he can express his anger at what's happening to him. The next passage addresses the decisions Mary has to make about letting Cal go. October 22nd. The phone rings in my apartment at 6:30 in the morning. Mary, this is Fred Wilson, Cal's doctor. My heart turns to ice. Yes, is all I can say. Cal has pneumonia. I need to know whether you want him to have antibiotics or not. So we have reached this moment. I'm numb, stunned. I can't speak. I hesitate, uncertain. I need time to think, I say. I go down to Cal's room. A nurse is sitting beside his bed. His eyes are closed. He's on oxygen. Plastic tubes are inserted in his nose. A machine is making a gurgling sound. Or maybe it's Cal. I can't tell. I can't imagine sitting in that room with the nurse, listening to the machine or Cal breathe. I'll be back, I say, and leave. In our apartment, I put on that purple down jacket that Cal gave me, knitted wool cap and gloves. It will be cold outside, but I need to think, which means I need to walk. Oh, Cal, help me, I say to myself. What would you want? I know what I want. I only want to keep you with me as long as possible. A voice speaks in my head. It's obvious what you want, Mary, but how about Cal? What would he want? I try to turn the voice off, but it clearly says, do you think Cal likes living like this? I wipe my eyes before the tears can freeze. Of course not, I say out loud. I go back to our apartment and I call Dr. Wilson. I've decided no antibiotics, I say.
This kind of decision is one of the very hardest things that face families, face people with Alzheimer's and their families. One of the things, and some of you may have been involved in this, one of the things that I worked on over the last several years was something called the Dartmouth Dementia Directive. We created this advanced directive supplement for people who don't have dementia at the time they're completing this, but are worried about getting dementia in the future. And it's to address questions just like this. What do you want should you develop mild dementia or moderate or severe dementia in terms of medical care, in terms of where do you want to be, and so forth? What kind of nutritional support do you want? And the most important thing by far is to have a loving family member who will make these decisions on your behalf if you have dementia and are no longer able to do that, and that usually should get codified as a durable power of attorney for healthcare. But the idea of our dementia directive, and we did a pilot of that over here at Kendall, so some of you may have filled that out. The idea was that people who are not now demented, but perhaps may be demented in the future, can express what they would want should the situation occur. So if you were in a stage of, let's say, moderate dementia or severe dementia, would you want antibiotics or not? Would you want nutrition and hydration and so forth? Those kinds of questions. These are things that families struggle with terribly, even in the best of circumstances, as Mary struggled here. I think this brief reading doesn't give the full picture, and her distillation of it into the book doesn't give the full picture of how much she wrestled with these issues of when do we draw the line? When do we decide to stop? And families wrestle with this all the time. Well, that is one of the reasons we created this tool. But these are the kinds of decisions that get faced. When people are dying of another disease, and Alzheimer's is a fatal disease, as Mary mentioned in here, terminal illness. But when people are dying of other terminal illnesses, usually they maintain their ability to say, I want this or I don't want this, until the very end, maybe until they're no longer able to speak for themselves. But in dementia, that happens very early in the disease, and people can lose that ability to make decisions months, years before those decisions actually have to be enacted. And that's the reason to have, first and foremost, a durable power of attorney who knows you and cares about you and will go to bat when is necessary, and for you to provide the help that they need by filling out what you might have wanted should this need occur. So we didn't have this back when this was going on in the late 90s. It's one of the many kinds of situations that I encountered that led us to want to create something like this. And now we have it, and it's there, and I hope people will take advantage of it. But, and not to suggest that a dementia directive makes this decision not difficult. It makes it a little less horrible, maybe a little less horrible, a little less difficult for family members who are struggling with how to decide how to proceed. It's still a terribly painful process, but maybe whatever help you can give someone is an important thing to consider.
So this will be our final reading selection, and then Dr. Santulli will have some ending comments, and then we'll have some Q&A. Okay? November 9th. Cal sleeps now, through the days, through the nights. He's put on oxygen once more. The nurse tells me it makes it easier for him and brings a chair so I can sit close to his bed. But I need more. I need to be able to touch him, but his arms and hands are tightly tucked beneath the sheets. I suppose so he won't disturb his oxygen tubes. So I settle for his ankle. Cal only turns and looks at me once. All he says is, "There you are." I know what he means, and I answer, "Always." I sit beside him into the night. He wakes again. He says my name and then, "I love you." He couldn't have given me a better gift. November 10th. I sit beside Cal for 16 hours, from early morning on. His daughter Joan arrives at 10 at night. I rise to greet her, and we talk for a minute or two, but then she puts her finger to her lips and says, "He's gone." I put my face against his, and it's true. He isn't there. Pneumonia has given him the exit he deserved. I kiss him and then whisper, "Thank you," hoping he can somehow hear me. Thank him for the so many things. For your courage, Cal, in being open about your illness, saying outright almost as soon as you knew, "I have a little bit of Alzheimer's." Thank you for always believing you could win against the disease, fighting it as you fought back on tennis and squash courts. You almost had me believing too. We'll beat Alzheimer's, you'd say, and then we'll write a book about it. Of course, we didn't beat it, but it didn't beat us either. We stayed close and loving in spite of it, and our last years together were still sweet.
Mary's life went on for quite a number of years. We were trying to figure out how many, at least 10. She was here as a widow, working on the book. She died before she completely finished it, and her daughter, Susan, took on the task of finishing it and really polishing it and putting it together, and Susan deserves a great deal of credit for its ultimate appearance in this last year. But Mary continued her life, and again, Kendall and her friends here and the staff here and Ruth Wybrow and others were tremendously helpful in having her recover from her grief. Not that it ever completely went away, as it never does, but helped her cope with it. And writing the book, as she and Cal said they would from the very beginning, she was determined to do, and it kept her in touch with Cal in an important way for her. It was helpful to her to write it, and hopefully you're reading it and are reading these selections, Erica's reading these selections and are talking about them, will be helpful to you, because although they were a unique couple, as is every couple who are dealing with Alzheimer's, there's many similarities in anyone who is struggling with this. And they were very fortunate to have a lot of things in their favor. They had great intelligence, they had a great love for each other, which was probably the most important. Friends, terrific problem-solving skills, and as Mary says, we have each other, and together we can handle anything.
Thank you so much. You did a beautiful job reading, and those comments were really helpful. I have a different feeling looking at their photos, like I know them a little bit now. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Santulli or for Erica?
Hi. My question is a little bit away from the book, but relates to the prospects eventually for some kind of real improvement in achieving a lessening of some of the effects of dementia, and eventually, in the long run, of getting part way to the curing of it, the same way it's happened in cancer. What's going on, in other words, in the research world with respect to dementia?
There's a tremendous amount going on, but unlike with cancer, the
Can you just restate the question? Not everybody could hear it.
Sure, yes. The question has to do with what advances, if any, are happening in the field of dementia care, Alzheimer's care, so that people will be able to have their symptoms improved and some more meaningful treatment applied for this disease, which is getting more and more common as our population ages, by the way. There's 5 million people in the U.S. with Alzheimer's now, and by the middle of the century, there's going to be 15 or 17 million people because of the aging of the population. When I was treating Cal in the middle and late 1990s, we were just beginning to have some medications for the treatment of the disease. And we were very excited about them because before that, we had nothing. Today, 25 years later, we still have the medicines that we were working on with Cal back then, and we don't have a whole lot more. There's a tremendous amount of research going on, and there have been many trials that have come out. There was even a drug that has been released on the market called aducanumab or Aduhelm, which has turned out to be a major problem and not very helpful, very expensive and filled with side effects, so not being very used very much and not approved for treatment by Medicare. There are other drugs on the horizon. We're always hopeful that there will be better ones. But right now, what we had back when Cal was struggling with this is basically what we still have today, 25 years later, and it's quite frustrating. There are many reasons why it's so hard to come up with good treatments for Alzheimer's. Some people feel that scientists are chasing the wrong, barking up the wrong tree. The amyloid hypothesis, where the belief is that accumulation of amyloid in the brain causes the disease. Some scientists are beginning to question, maybe that's really not all that's going on. Maybe that's more a result of the disease rather than a cause of the disease. So there's a great deal of debate. There's a lot of work being done. Sooner or later, hopefully, we will have more meaningful treatments that are safe and effective. But I can't say that there's anything on the imminent horizon. The best approach for Alzheimer's now is prevention, by staying healthy, by staying cognitively intact as much as possible, by keeping connected with others, by keeping one's mind active. Those are things that may help stave it off, but hopefully before too long we'll have better treatments. I wish I could give you a more hopeful answer than that, but we're not coming up very fast with what we need, and it's desperately needed, not only here in the U.S., but worldwide. The numbers are going up very rapidly here. They're going up even more rapidly around the world as population ages around the world. So I don't want to leave with a pessimistic note like that, but at least trying to be realistic. The kinds of care that we are talked about in this book and that we're talked about here, not very glamorous, but very essential. Good support from people, good units like Whittier, people like Ruth Wybrow and people who run support groups. Those low-tech treatments, if you will, are the things that are tried and true and valuable and really need to be the focus of our care until we come up with that medicine that's going to reverse these symptoms.
Thank you. Erica, I would really be interested in your perspective on the book and this general discussion. You have lots of experience. I wonder what struck you.
Well, the book was very moving, and so the question was, what was my perspective about reading the book and I guess having the experience that I've had through the years. I found the book very moving, and their story is one that I have heard so many times in different ways over and over, and it also made me think of how far we've come with Whittier and how important it is to have support systems for not only the families and to have staff that are trained and educated and caring and compassionate and who love what they do, which I think is very apparent on Whittier. I believe we have a really strong team, and I try to teach the staff to meet the residents where they are in their disease process, and that, we're focused on non-pharmacological approaches. We're focused on behavioral interventions and really trying to create moments of joy for the residents in what we hope is now their home. So I just really enjoyed the book and thought it was very familiar, but it was very beautiful.
Erica and Dr. Santulli, thank you so much. This was quite lovely and really informative. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
You will find copies of this book in the Kendall at Hanover Library, or you may purchase this fine memoir at a local bookstore.